Writers are artillerymen. This is artillery. Soviet writer and journalist David Isaevich Yokhimovich. Literary pseudonym D. Zolotov. Honored Worker of Culture of the RSFSR. Officer, Senior Lieutenant, Artilleryman, Frontovik frontline soldier, participant of the Battle of Kursk, disabled veteran of the World War II, member of the Union of Writers and Journalists of the USSR, editor of Literary and Dramatic Broadcasting of the Regional Radio Committee, permanent correspondent of the Soviet Information Bureau, staff correspondent of Central Newspapers, TASS correspondent for the Novosibirsk and Tomsk regions. Awarded the Orders of the Red Star, the Patriotic War First Class, the Badge of Honor, medals for the victory over Germany, veteran of labor, and many other medals and decorations. Born on December 3, 1917, in Irkutsk. At the moment when battles were taking place between Red Guards and Cossacks, cadets and ensigns for the establishment of Soviet power after the October Revolution. These were among the largest battles in terms of casualties after similar fighting in Moscow, serving as a prologue to the civil war in eastern Siberia. David's father, Isai, arrived in 1905 following his father Liza and mother Trina. Liza received 10 years of exile as a revolutionary and participant in the Wuj Weavers' uprising. Around the same years, Isai's future wife, Genya Anna Grigoritevna, David's mother, arrived from Ukraine. David's grandparents would return to Poland only in 1920 and would die from carbon monoxide poisoning in their home, trying to keep warm, literally in the first days. In 1929, David moved with his parents to Novosibirsk. There he began to write. While still in the lower grades, he published a school wall newspaper. His interest and love for literature were instilled by his father Isai Lazarevich, who adored the works of Anton Chekhov and constantly read his stories to his son. He began publishing in newspapers and magazines in his final school years, reports, correspondences, reviews, essays, in publications such as Krasnaya Sibiryaka, and in newspapers Sovetskaya Sibir, Unilenonets, and Novosibirsky Rabashi. He became a child correspondent for the Siberian children's magazine, later Tovarish. In 1932, David Isaevich attended, as a correspondent for the regional Komsomol newspaper Bolshevistskaya Smena, later Molodosť Sibiri, the West Siberian Regional Energy Congress. He was only 15 years old. In 1936, after graduating from secondary school now 50, he was sent to the All-Union Communist Institute of Journalism under the Central Committee of the USSR. From 1936 until the beginning of World War II, David Yokhimovich gained extensive journalistic experience, working both on the radio and in various print publications. He was a literary editor. From 1937, he became the executive editor of Literary and Dramatic Broadcasting of the Novosibirsk Regional Committee for Radioification and Broadcasting. He was a special correspondent of the latest news editorial office of the Regional Radio Committee for the Tomsk and Novosibirsk regions. In addition, he became a staff correspondent for the newspapers Soviet Art, Bolshevistskaya Smena, Unilenonets, medical worker for the Novosibirsk region and Altai Krai, as well as for several central newspapers in western Siberia, and a freelance literary contributor to the newspaper Sovetskaya Sibir. In June 1941, he volunteered to the Workers' and Peasants' Red Army. He completed a military course at the 1st Tau Tomsk Artillery School and, from the first months of 1942, served in active units of the Western Front as deputy commander for drill of the 5th Howitzer Battery of the 296th Howitzer Artillery Regiment, decorated with the Orders of Lenin and Kutuzov, Lvov. Part of the 1st Howitzer Artillery Brigade, decorated with the Orders of the Red Banner, and Bogdan Khmelnytsky, Star Konstantinov, of the 3rd Artillery Division of the Reserve of the Supreme High Command, decorated with the Orders of the Red Banner, and Suvorov, Zhytomyr. June 15, 1943, Combat Characteristika evaluation of Lieutenant David Isaevich Yokhimovich. David Isaevich Yokhimovich, being Deputy Battery Commander, in battles for the villages of Arstovo and Polyaki in February 1943. 3 German tanks were destroyed, the fire of 2 machine gun positions was suppressed, and 3 stone houses in which fascist submachine gunners were located were destroyed. The battery participated in repelling 3 enemy counterattacks, as a result of which up to a company of German submachine gunners and riflemen was destroyed and scattered. He proved himself to be a good specialist, a brave and courageous warrior, and a good comrade. His battery was constantly under heavy enemy artillery fire, but due to good entrenchment of the guns and crews, it suffered no losses either in personnel or equipment. In addition, he actively participated in the political life of the regiment. Under his leadership and through his persistent work, a collection about the combat path of the regiment forward to the west was published. Comrade Yokhimovich is a disciplined, politically literate commander. Deputy Commander of the 296th HAP for Political Affairs, Major Zavalin. On July 19, 1943, he received shrapnel wounds from an aerial bomb to the right temple in both hands. The left hand would remain permanently crippled. July 26, 1943, extract from order, Active Red Army, to the units of the 108th Rifle Division of the 11th Guards Army of the Western Front, on awarding personnel. 031. On behalf of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, for exemplary fulfillment of combat tasks of the command at the front in the fight against the German invaders, and for the valor and courage shown, Lieutenant David Isaevich Yokhimovich is awarded the Order of the Red Star. Commander of the 108th Rifle Division, Colonel Taramov Chief of Staff, Lazovsky. He was also awarded a personal weapon, Parabellum pistol. In 1944, he was demobilized from the army and worked at TASS and the Soviet Information Bureau. From that time, he became a staff correspondent of TASS for the Novosibirsk and Tomsk regions. He received higher pedagogical and political education. He published essays and feuilletons in central newspapers, Krasnoarmeyskaya Izvestia of the Siberian Military District, Pravda, Izvestia, Literaturnaya Gazeta, Literatura Izhizn. In magazines, Krokodil, Sibirskie Ogni, and others. Feuilletons, humorous stories, and essays were published. One of the fragments that pierced his helmet and entered his temple remained in his right temple for another 20 years and was removed only in the summer of 1963. He graduated from the Higher Party School and the Faculty of History and Philology of the Novosibirsk Pedagogical Institute. Frequent trips to Moscow and throughout the Soviet Union brought him friendship and communication with Korney Ivanovich Tchaikovsky, Soviet poet, publicist, literary critic, children's writer, journalist, the most published author of children's literature in the Soviet Union and Russia. Viktor Efimovich Ardov, Soviet writer, satirist, playwright, screenwriter, publicist, and caricaturist. Lev Abramovich Kassel, Soviet writer and screenwriter. Agnia Lvovna Bardo, Soviet children's poet, writer, screenwriter, radio host. Samuel Yakovlevich Marshak, Soviet poet, playwright, translator, literary critic, screenwriter and many others. This is a TASS statement. This is the situation. In Central America, it is becoming increasingly tense. The Soviet Union. The TASS statement continues. The development of the international situation must be brought to an end. The telegraph agency of the Soviet Union. TASS is the largest information agency in the world. Through TASS, its task was to cover, communicate, and rapidly transmit information. First, about visits of important guests to the USSR, among whom were American astronauts Neil Armstrong and Frank Borman, and together with them Georgy Timofeyevich Beregovwa, pilot cosmonaut of the USSR, twice hero of the Soviet Union. The Battle of Kursk and Poltava would bind them with David Isaevich. They would remain loyal friends for many decades. Leader of the GDR Walter Ulbricht. Prime Minister of France Georges Pompidou. President of Mexico José López Portillo. 37th President of the USA Richard Nixon. In the background walks Sabir Musharevich Koenig, David's friend. A frontalvik frontline soldier, prose writer, essayist, and translator. He helped David Isaevich with translation during visits of foreign delegations. Charles de Gaulle, founder and first president of the Fifth Republic, Prime Minister and Minister of Defense of France. In this photo appears my paternal grandfather, Nikolai Vasilyevich Bezryadin, editor-in-chief of the newspaper Sovetskaya Sibir. Writer David Isaevich Yokhimovich published both under his own name and under the pseudonym D. Zolotov. In pre-war publications, the pseudonyms David Storm and Shamil are also found. In the early 1950s, D. Davidov. His bibliography includes around a dozen books, The Feat of Kirya Bayev, a documentary novella about a young partisan My Siberia, poems and essays Commonwealth from the series Heroes of Our Time, about innovators and leading workers of the machine tool industry. Stories, A Living Legend, Impossible Not to Notice, Stories and Feuilletons. One Life and Three Deaths of Georgy Basarov, Notes of a Century. The total circulation of his works reached about 2.5 million copies. In addition, plays and radio productions were staged based on his literary works. On Air, Creativity. A literary and dramatic program of Novosibirsk Radio.
Творчество. Литературно-драматическая программа Новосибирского радио.
Today you will hear an essay investigation by writer David Zolotov in Search of the Bluebird. Films were also made. The play Dearer Than Life, co-written with Sergei Osipovich Kuznetsov, was staged at the Novosibirsk Youth Theater, among them a documentary film of interstate scale. It was filmed jointly by the USSR and France, The Story of 1 Feet, 1964. About the rescue of a Soviet girl from a concentration camp by the French Hoffman family during the War of 1941 to 1945. The Soviet feature film Peasant's Son 1975, filmed at the Maxim Gorky Film Studio by director Irina Tarkovskaya, based on the novella remake by Raisa Grigorieva about the feat of Kirya Bayev. The novella The Feat of Kirya Bayev was written by David Yokhimovich in co-authorship with Alexandra Galenkova and was published in Novosibirsk back in 1957. Guests of the warm and hospitable Yokhimovich family home in Novosibirsk included many famous names of the USSR, theater, cinema, television, and print press, for example Alexei Batalov, Nikolai Ozarev, and many others. Diplomatic workers and foreign journalists as well. He passed away on May 7th, on his professional holiday, the day of radio workers in all branches of communications. And he was buried on the day of victory in the Great Patriotic War over the fascist invaders, May 9, 1990. The memory of David Isaevich lived on for a very long time, even almost 15 years after his death. Thanks to the first deputy chairman of the government of Moscow Vladimir Iosifovich Rezin, it became possible to organize a complex of commemorative events in Novosibirsk. At 50 Lenin Street, where the writer lived from 1963 to 1990, a memorial plaque was installed, created by the outstanding Russian sculptor Nikolai Ivanovich Martyonov. Among youth, an open city literary competition named after the writer and journalist was organized. A website was created, and a fund for a museum study of the writer was formed. Part of David Isaevich's archive was transferred in 2013 to the State Archive of the Novosibirsk region. Personal documents of the writer, working materials, TASS reports, printed editions, feuilletons, essays, interviews with war participants, excerpts of Novosibirsk radio news, and many others.